What up? This is Rama Screen, and in the anticipation of Bloodthirsty arriving in select theaters and on demand April 23, I'm here talking with the director of this new horror thriller film, Amelia. How are you, Amelia?
I'm good, thanks. How are you?
Good. Thank you for taking the time. Congrats on the film. Let me start with the obvious question. How did you come about Wendy and Lowell's script, and what was your reaction when you first read it?
Yeah, so I was finishing up kind of post production on my first feature, and I was looking for some kind of friendly distribution advice from another producer in Canada. And I was put in touch with Mike Peterson, who's one of the producers on Bloodthirsty. And he's like, "We're looking for a director for this script." So I read the script and then eventually met Wendy and Lowell. Yeah, and when I first read it, I guess what struck me most was just kind of like the how much was packed into the kind of premise of it and this juxtaposition of these horror elements but then also this like creative process, and I thought that was a really interesting contrast. And I liked Gray's journey as a character, so those were kind of the things I was drawn to when I first read it.
And I think the fact that there's lots of strong female presence in front of and behind the cameras. You, the writing team, and the lead star. I think it's
Mhm.
awesome that Bloodthirsty is sort of like a feminist take on werewolves. Was that intentional or a subconscious thing? And what do you think that brought to the table?
Yeah, I mean, I think that all the films I've made so far, a short and another feature, have all really focused on women, and I'm going to probably continue to do that. But I don't think it's anything intentional. Like it's just kind of like write what you know. There's not some sort of like agenda behind it. I mean, I kind of struggle with the word feminist in terms of a film like this because I don't know. I just think those words can get overused as well. Like, obviously, I'm not against the word. I consider myself a feminist, but I think when you're labeling a piece of art with that label, it kind of comes with a lot of weight that I don't know if this film necessarily addresses. For me, I guess personally, I'm kind of sick of seeing like the strong female lead and that being kind of like the checkbox of like, oh, well, that's that. So we've done it, sort of thing, in terms of female representation. I think for me, I like to see women on screen who are very emotionally complex and who are potentially flawed and struggling. And I think Gray is definitely one of those characters. She has a lot of issues and she doesn't necessarily resolve all those issues either. She's kind of conflicted in a lot of ways. So for me, those are the kind of women that I want to see on screen.
Your previous film, Bleed With Me, was set in an isolated cabin in the middle of nowhere. Bloodthirsty is set in a mansion in the middle of nowhere. It's understandable though, because this one, musicians do tend to record stuff in places like that for weeks or sometimes months, working on their next album. So, but tell me though, what is so fascinating about isolation in this genre, and is that the tone that you tend to gravitate toward in your storytelling?
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely a bit of a coincidence that this script also kind of had this wintry, isolated location. So I've done that twice now. But I guess in terms of within like the horror genre, it helps as a narrative device because you're isolating people, and then that's usually when things become more tense and heightened. If you don't have this escape and you feel isolated. So in both films, that kind of heightens the tension between the characters, and both films kind of focus on like three people kind of being stuck together
Mm-hmm.
and the interpersonal dynamics. And I think, yeah, being isolated is always going to like ramp up that tension between people. Yeah, and then it gives an atmosphere as well, and I definitely think the wintry vibe of both films kind of adds to the atmosphere of like unease and eeriness. So that's, yeah, I think it's an interesting locale for sure.
If you don't mind my asking, since this is my first time interviewing you, what is your directing style? In other words, when you're directing Lauren and Greg, what were your methods in trying to get the most out of their performances?
Yeah, I mean, I see it like most directors probably like as a very collaborative experience. So I always like to listen to the actors and hear their choices, um, because I think they're inhabiting that character, whereas I am thinking about a multitude of things. So I think definitely now I have that with Lauren, especially since we've done two films together, but really like talking through the character a lot with the actors. We didn't have a ton of rehearsal time on this film, so it was more just kind of a matter of talking about who these people were, and what they want. Another thing I like to do, mainly I did with Lauren on this film, was kind of break up the script into like 5 different sections, and give kind of key emotional words for each different section. So if we were in a scene that was belonging to that section, she could kind of draw on something specific, just kind of like general guiding things so that you're thinking about the film as a whole, especially for, Lauren, she's in almost every scene, pretty much every scene. So we're really following her journey from beginning to end. So I think anything to kind of remind the actors of what that arc is.
The design for the werewolves is very interesting. Of course, not every movie can do the big CG visual effects underworld kind of liken. But I think what you did here was very interesting. It looks old school, something like Rick Baker would come up with, which
Mhm.
is awesome. Talk to me about the design and working with the hair and special effects makeup crew to make that possible for this film.
Yeah, well, when I came on board, this idea to do more kind of a hybrid, less wolf-like creature was kind of already established. I think mainly for budget reasons, but when you have those limitations, you didn't want to put someone in a kind of hairy suit, because it can get comical, and there's a fine line, I think, with werewolf movies versus something like vampires, because vampires are just like more human and they don't have the transformation isn't as big, obviously. So yeah, that idea was kind of pre-established when I came on board. And then for me, it was just kind of like working with the special effects artist to kind of come up with the look of them. It was all pretty quickly, it all happened pretty fast. So we didn't really have any time for tests or anything. So I don't think I saw anything until we were actually shooting. And so it was a combination of that and then really working with Lauren, particularly for the transformation scene of like trying to get the physicality of it, knowing we had very limited resources. Um, so just trying to think of that like more body horror, more grotesque, approach to it. And definitely I'm a big fan of American Werewolf in London. So that transformation scene is the pinnacle of that kind of stuff. So I definitely made Lauren watch that, and that was a big inspiration.
Oh, so awesome. Love Werewolf in London as well. And I'm curious if you could share, have you ever experienced the same creative process struggle that Gray went through in this film? Like, the struggle between staying true to your art and, meeting the demands of the industry, whatever those changes may be.
Yeah, I think what I relate to more in terms of Gray's predicament is like the way she's kind of torn away from Charlie and her girlfriend, who is her girlfriend. And I relate to that in the sense I think art can be quite selfish, to some extent, and it's very
Mm.
self-involved, and especially filmmaking can be very all-consuming. So I think as a filmmaker, striking that balance of like your, romantic relationships or friendships, like as well as your work, I think can be challenging because it's like films just kind of really can be all-consuming. So I guess I relate to that kind of aspect of it, of trying to find that balance, which obviously Gray does not really succeed in. But I think that artists should try to be able to find that balance.
And finally, what's next for you? Are you going to be tackling other creatures for your next project? Monsters like vampires, witches, or zombies, perhaps?
I mean, those all sound fun. Maybe I should do a Frankenstein film.
Yes.
Um, yeah, I'm working on a script right now with a writer from Toronto that involves tentacle monsters. So sticking in kind of a similar thing. But yeah, so that's one project on the horizon, and thinking about other things as well.
Awesome. For my fans at home, everybody go check out Bloodthirsty, arriving in select theaters on demand April 23. Amelia, thank you for talking to me and congratulations.
Thank you so much.